Harvest. Introduction. When people set foot into casinos, or at least some people set foot into casinos, they lose their minds. They lose all sense of judgment or decorum or really kind of any sense of common sense really at all. I have been in and out of the casino business for about 20 years, and I have seen crazy things in that time. I have seen fights. I have seen heartfelt marriage proposals. I've seen people break up. I've seen people do drugs right off of the craps table. I have seen people have sex in God knows how many places. And I have seen fights, fist fights, between grandmothers and granddaughters. Okay? I have seen crazy things. People lose their minds when they set foot on casino floors. This was never more true maybe for me in my career than when I was working as a dealer at Grand Victoria Casino and Resort by Hyatt in Rising Sun, Indiana. Now this casino was new to the area, and the closest casino was about 300 miles away. So people didn't really have a clear understanding of what it meant to be in a casino. At that point, all they really knew was what they'd seen in movies, right? So they'd seen, Vegas Vacation, and they'd seen, Cincinnati Kid and Bond films, and all these really great movies that are fantastic, but have very little actual resemblance to what happens in a casino. Chapter 1, sowing the seeds. Harvest time was always the best time at Grand Victoria because, of course, Rising Sun, Indiana is a very rural area, the closest big city being Cincinnati, which is about an hour's drive north. And we had every different kind of farmer that you can think of, soybeans and cabbage and corn and kind of everything. But the guys that were the most fun were the tobacco farmers. These guys would take all of their goods to market, and then they would show up at the casino with just wads of cash. And again, have no idea how to really behave in a casino, but they had a bunch of money. So now, when this casino opened, we were one of the first casinos in Indiana. So what that meant is that frontline people like me, were all pretty new, and they had to bring in supervisors and managers from other markets to kind of teach us how to do it, right? Because none of us really knew how to do it. And this worked out pretty well for the most part. We brought in one guy named Mike, and Mike was a seasoned guy, right? He'd been in the business around the country 20, 25 years, and Mike would have been a really good guy if he wasn't such an asshole. So on October 11th, 1997, it was a Saturday night, and I was dealing on a craps table, and there was another dealer with me, a woman named Jenny, who was probably in her mid-20s and had been a dealer for a number of years, but had just learned craps. Now Mike would describe himself as old school, okay? And what that meant to him anyway was that women did not belong on craps tables, okay? Not as dealers, for sure. And he told me once on break that it was not a good and proper day until he had made a girl dealer cry on a craps table. And this is who Mike was. Okay? So I'm on this craps table with Jenny, and Jenny's fairly new, and Mike was our standing floor. He was our supervisor that day, and he had been giving Jenny a particularly hard time. Now Jenny had taken it in stride for the most part. You could tell that she was frustrated, but she was doing her job. And it was a Saturday night, so it was busy. There was a lot going on, but it wasn't a particularly notable evening. So it gets to be about 9:30, 10 o'clock, and the craps table that we're at is the closest to the entrance. We actually refer to it sometimes as the greeter's table. But we're there, and it's a regular day, and I've got my head down dealing when this massive hand reaches down into my layout in front of me and drops a pile, really, of dirty, crumpled up $100 bills. And I look up to see this tower of a man standing in front of me. He's got denim overalls on and a white t-shirt. He's got scraggly hair and a full, bushy beard. And he's probably 6'6", 6'7", 325, 350. This is a big, big dude. But the thing that was most noticeable about him was he had a piece of tobacco in his mouth that was so big that it made his cheek bulge out in kind of a freakish way. Right? It was very weird. So I pick up all of his money and I hand it in and we get it counted down, and he's got about $3,000, and I hand him his chips. And he clearly thinks that this makes him the biggest player in the casino. He thinks he's the big man now, when in reality he's not the biggest player at the table. Right? But whatever. So we carry on, And he's a little bit of a jerk, and it's hard to understand him with all of this crap in his mouth, right? So it's kind of like this inherent slur, right? But whatever, okay. And he's a little bit of a jerk. It's Saturday night, and it's a casino, so we do what we can, we carry on. At about the 2-hour mark of all of this, Bubba starts, well, and I should say that I never really got his name, so for our purposes this evening, we're going to call him Bubba. But at about the 2-hour mark, Bubba starts to feel the Jack and Cokes that he's been downing. Okay? So what this means for me is that it's even harder to understand him now because he's slurring. But worse than that, he's having trouble controlling the chaw that's in his mouth, resulting in a fairly steady stream of this tobacco juice running down into his beard. And periodically, he would wipe it away with his hand. Now it's on his hand. Right? So we do our best to kind of ignore this as best we can, but then he reaches into the pocket in front of his overalls and he pulls out a pouch and he grabs another pinch with his massive hands of tobacco and shoves it into his already overfull mouth, causing a wave of this crap to fall down into his beard and onto his shirt. And it's his turn to shoot the dice. Now, beyond this just being disgusting, it's a security problem, right? So if he gets this sticky tobacco saliva on the dice and then throws the dice, it changes how they roll, right? This is not okay, right? So Mike decides to do his job, takes a break from giving Jenny a hard time, and he walks around the table and he goes out to have a chat with our pal, Bubba. He stands next to him and he says, "Sir, I'm going to need you to take some of that out of your mouth. We can't have the saliva on the chips and the dice." And Bubba doesn't even really look at him and says, "I play my money, I do what I want." And Mike calmly but firmly says, "Sir, if you don't take some of that out of your mouth, I'm not going to let you shoot the dice." And he says, "Prachoo!" And more of this crap rolls out of his face. Mike's had enough. So he turns to flag down the security guard. And Bubba sees him make this motion to flag down the security guard. And before Mike can do anything about it, Bubba says, "Fine!" And he spit that whole ball of chaw onto Mike's shoes. And in that moment, as we're all just stunned and disgusted by what just happened, Jenny, without missing a beat, leans over to me and flatly says, "Mike had that coming." Chapter 2, full bloom. So, when Grand Victoria first opened, we were one of the first casinos in Indiana to open. So Indiana was still trying to figure out how to regulate casinos, right? How to tax them, how to make sure that the rules were being followed and all this kind of stuff. And because they were trying to figure it out, it resulted in some unusual laws, right? The most unusual, I think, was probably the fact that first we had to be on water all the time, so we were a riverboat. And more than that, we had to sail, right? We had to leave the dock, right? So and it was a fairly rigid schedule. We had to go every hour, right? So we'd be at the dock for an hour, and then we'd go out for an hour, and then we'd come back, right? And we would sail up and down the Ohio River, and it was actually a fairly nice cruise. When the weather was nice, you could go outside and take it all in, and it was fine. But it created a lot of logistical problems, as you might imagine. People trying to get on when they show up, like they drove an hour from Cincinnati to get here, and now they can't get on the boat. Or you've got people that decide they want to get off, and they can't get off. So it created all this kind of weird logistical stuff, but that's how they wanted it, and it was like that for years. One of the other unusual rules was that the state regulators, the Indiana Gaming Commission, had to be on board all the time, 24/7. There had to be a regulator on the boat all the time. And to make it even more interesting, the regulators aren't regulators as you would normally think of them, right? These are not guys walking around with clipboards. These guys were state troopers. Okay? These are gun-carrying, badge-carrying state troopers. These guys are cops. Okay? So it's a casino. So security is always an issue, and it usually breaks down something like this. So you've got regular security guards, and these folks are the guys who check your IDs and greet you at the door and move chips from table to table and this kind of stuff, right? Just kind of regular people. And if they have a problem, they elevate to what we call the brute squad. Okay? And these were the guys that would break up fights or move large sums of money either on and off the boat or these kind of things. And they were kind of the heavies, right? And at Grand Victoria, their uniform happened to be a red suit jacket, right? So of course we called them redcoats, right? Because that's what they look like, right? So we always refer to them as redcoats. And if the redcoats needed to escalate, they escalated to these state troopers that were always on the boat if somebody needed to be arrested or whatever. So when Mike turned to flag down the security guard, he was flagging down a regular security guard who was just kind of standing at a post. And when that security guard saw Bubba launch this ball of chaw at Mike, he got onto his radio and yelled whatever the code is to send in the Marines because this is a problem. So in a matter of seconds, it seemed like redcoats just started to appear out of nowhere, right? Like boom, there's one, and like immediately there's like 4 or 5 of these things, these guys are. And Bubba is now looking at Jenny, waiting for her to send him the dice. Because he sent Mike away, so now it's his turn to shoot, so it must be okay. And Jenny, of course, is having none of it, and then neither am I, and the game's coming to a complete stop. But Bubba's oblivious to these redcoats that are around him. Finally, our lead redcoat guy comes up, and he's kind of a medium-sized guy, maybe just a shade bigger than me. And he stands next to Bubba and says, "Sir, you're done for the night." And Bubba hesitates for a second, and then he spins faster than I would expect someone this size to be able to spin, and he shoves our guy. And our guy didn't see it coming. He goes tumbling, right? And before anybody else can engage Bubba, he spins back to the craps table, and he grabs the underside of the table and yanks it for all that he's worth, okay? Now the good news here, friends, is that we're on a riverboat, and riverboats sometimes move. So we had taken the precaution of bolting the tables to the floor so that they would move. I was never happier for this moment, for that fact, than that moment right there, because for all he's worth would have meant that table flipping over onto me. Okay? But still, it looks like an earthquake hit the table because chips and drinks and people just go everywhere, right? And as a dealer, my job in this situation, and the rest of the dealers, our job is to secure the bankroll, right? So we get the lid up on the game and we lock it down, and then after that, our job is crowd control, right? Keeping people away from this, which wasn't a big deal because nobody wanted to get in the middle of Bubba and everybody else, right? So I'm just kind of standing, kind of taking it all in. The railing that Bubba had grabbed had broken off in his hand, sending the drinks and ashtrays that railing had previously been responsible for everywhere. He drops it on the floor, and he turns and he starts to size up these 5 or 6 redcoats that are in front of him. And he's got this look on his face like he's a cornered animal. And our guys, they look like they're trying to tame a lion, right? So they're inching towards him, kind of looking at each other, none of them wanting to be the first ones there, right? Like nobody wants to mess with this. But Bubba makes the decision for them. When he decides to make a move for the door, he starts to head towards the entrance, which is not far away, but it's kind of around a corner from where this table is sitting. So he starts to go, and our guys jump on top of him, right? And I had the strongest flashback to the 1985 Chicago Bears. The refrigerator, when they handed the ball to refrigerator Perry, and he goes running for a touch, trying to get a touchdown, and there's 5 Tampa Bay Buccaneers on his back, right? Just running down the way. And nobody's going to tackle this dude. And I will say that just watching them try was worth the price of admission because it was ridiculous. So he gets to the corner and he looks around the corner to where the entrance is, and I can see the moment in his eyes when he realizes that we're not at the dock. There's nowhere for him to go. Right? So he can't get off the boat. And just as this realization hits him, one of our friends from the gaming commission, one of these state troopers, shows up. And now of course, because they were on the boat all the time, we knew who these guys were. And the guy who shows up is a guy that we had all called Little John. Now, Little John was a state trooper, but he was short, right? He was maybe 5'4", 5'5", right? Kind of a short guy. And because of it, I mean, he was well built, but he, was still pretty short. And a lot of people didn't really take him all that seriously when it came to, like, now it's time to get forced, and Little John's going to show up. I'm like, nah. But Little John standing there. Our guys are kind of around, and now there's like 8 or 9 of our redcoats are kind of piled around him. And Little John steps in front of Bubba, and he says, "Sir, that's," and before he can finish his sentence, Bubba's tree trunk-sized leg comes flying up, catches him right between the legs. Little John is lifted off the ground. He stumbles for a second, recovers his balance, and then charges Bubba with all of his strength. And he catches Bubba in the diaphragm with his shoulder with a ton of force. And you can hear the air leave Bubba's lungs. Right? Now there were some redcoats in the way, so he wasn't able to get like a grip on him. So it just kind of sent Bubba stumbling backwards, and a couple of our redcoats fell off a little bit. And so Bubba's standing, he's a little winded, and John is standing there, and what happened next was maybe the smoothest move I have ever seen in my life. Okay? So Bubba looks at Little John and starts to charge him. Little John sidesteps, draws his handcuffs, catches his right wrist, locks the handcuffs, catches him under the elbow, spins this around, puts him in an arm lock. It steps in line with Bubba's momentum, continues that momentum, and shoves him with all of his muscles, and slams him into a steel bulkhead wall. Boom! And the sound that made was just deafening. I was about 30 feet away. I could feel it in the floor. There was a painting that was screwed to the wall about 10 feet away from where Bubba slammed into it, and it cracked the glass in that picture. Bubba hit this wall with such force. It was unreal. And Bubba at that point was done. And the only reason that Bubba was still standing is that John was holding him up with his shoulder. And of course, Bubba's too big to hook up with one set of handcuffs. He reaches out, and one of the redcoats hands him another set of handcuffs. He quickly locks him up. And he's got him standing there, he's got him all hooked up. Now, Grand Victoria was equipped with a brig. We had a brig for just such an occasion. Unfortunately, it's 2 decks down. And it's probably not big enough to accommodate Bubba anyway, because he's a giant person. So John, while he's got Bubba pinned up against the wall, he announces to the redcoats, "We're going to hook him up right here." And he gets a 3rd pair of handcuffs, and another redcoat comes over, and they walk Bubba over to a railing that's kind of associated with an escalator, right? It's welded into the ground. We're fairly confident that Bubba's not going to be able to pull this off the ground. And they spin him around, and they hook the handcuffs into the other handcuffs that are there, and then to the railing. And Bubba struggles for a minute, and then finally slumps to the floor. So as I'm looking at the scene, I'm looking at our redcoats, and there's 10, 11, 12 of them standing there, and they're a mess, right? Our guys are having a hard day. They've got jackets that are ripped, all their shirts are untucked. One of them's bleeding because he'd taken a blow or fell or did something. He's bleeding from his forehead. And Little John is standing over Bubba, looks down at him, and he says, "You're under arrest." And Bubba somehow manages to find the gall to look up and seem surprised that this was the case. Now, in the years after that I worked in Grand Victoria, I can tell you without a fact that no one ever called him Little John again. Chapter 3, A Hard Row to Hoe. So it just so happened that about a month before this Saturday Night Melee, I had gotten a speeding ticket on the way to work. And I was frequently late, and I lived about 45 minutes away from the casino, so I would drive really fast. And I got a speeding ticket, and I had to go to court on Monday morning. And if you've ever been to court for traffic violations or whatever it is you've got to go to court for, they always, as Rattlebone was talking about earlier, they always bring out the guys that need to be arraigned first, because they've been in the drunk tank or whatever they've been in since, some of them since Friday night. So I'm sitting in the gallery waiting for my name to be called when they start to bring out these sorry souls. And sure enough, there's our old pal Bubba. And Bubba was in his orange jumpsuit, and his wrists were shackled to his hips. And there was another chain that ran down between his legs and attached to the shackles that had his ankles together. He was in full shuffle, looking all back at the bus. And when it became Bubba's turn to stand in front of the judge, he stood there quietly with his lawyer as they arraigned him on 13 felony assault counts. One for each of the redcoats that had been involved, and one for the chaw that he spit on Mike. He was also arraigned on aggravated battery of a police officer and resisting arrest for his fun with John. And just for good measure, they also charged him with 3 counts of destruction of property. One for the craps table, that was thousands of dollars worth of damage. One for the glass in the painting from the melee with John. And the third one for the scratches on the railing from the handcuffs. They threw the book at this guy. And so that was in 1997. It's 2019 now, so Bubba might be out of jail by now. But I can tell you for certain that that was Bubba's last harvest. Epilogue. Friends, casinos are a lot of fun. Okay? So you should go. You should go to casinos. You can get a great meal, take in a show, play some games, have a good time. And the vast majority of people go in, behave themselves in a reasonable fashion, and enjoy their experience. Okay, you should go. I don't want it to seem like I'm telling you that this kind of thing happens in casinos all the time, but more often than you would think. But anyway, but you should absolutely go to this. But if you go to a casino and you start to get the feeling in your mind that the laws that apply to the rest of us don't apply to you, remember Bubba's story. And know that in the end, the house always wins.